Wanderers. If you haven't checked out our TikTok page yet, please do, and make sure you hit the follow button. When we get 1,000 followers, we'll be able to view exclusive content and go live on TikTok.
Do you want to talk about your rabbit hole last night?
Yeah, so I didn't text Hannah until this morning because I know that she likes to go to bed kind of early, which is fine. And it was a school night for her after all. But I was on TikTok last night, doom scrolling like one does. And I came across it said 1 day ago, so yesterday, so it would have been Tuesday. And it said that Wade Wilson was sentenced to death. So I was like, oh, this is the guy that Hannah was talking about on the intro a few episodes ago. And so it was like,
is that the one everyone thinks is sexy?
Yeah. And I got to be honest with you. No disrespect, Wade. I'm sure you're maybe a nice person.
On death row, but you must be nice.
I don't see it. I see why a lot of people who are in the dark romance community probably like it. He's got like an average body, I would say. I mean, he's not like business professional, but he's got all the tattoos, up the neck and all over the face. And I went down the rabbit hole because I remembered Hannah asking about like, oh, have you heard all about this? And I hadn't. I was down the rabbit hole for like 2.5 hours last night on TikTok, listening and reading. And now something I texted you this morning and said, did you know that he has a boyfriend allegedly?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought he had a girlfriend so granted, you can't believe everything you see or hear on TikTok, but this girl had a recording of him talking to some chick on the prison phone. Yeah. And they're like, new girlfriend for Wade Wilson. But like, it probably was just like a fan, like quote unquote. I guess you could say a fan.
Yeah. And somebody else had mentioned, like, you have to think about somebody who's, being convicted of murdering people. They're probably pretty manipulative. So they're probably utilizing a lot of different people as a lot of resources. The gentleman, it was the same thing that you had kind of said, that they were doing a call and it was the audio overlaid over a video. And you could hear him talking and he's like calling this gentleman like babe and baby and but like it was kind of hard to tell what they were talking about because the other guy was talking as if he was like way over here from the microphone. So it was like if I was talking over here and you can't hear me, it was kind of like that. But that was my. I just
want to know like who was the first person on TikTok to be like, oh my God, the whole book talk community will love this man. Like who did that?
I didn't find that in my doom scroll. I saw a lot of stuff though. There was a lot of people going like, he's innocent, and there were a lot of people saying, he's guilty. And I mean, of course, like you said, you can only kind of take what you see online with a grain of salt. But I didn't see any real evidence that pointed towards not guilty to me. Mm-hmm. I think there was also like, I thought it was just the murder charges. I say just like it's small, but there was also like the grand theft. I guess he had also stolen car.
Goodness gracious.
So
add it on.
There was quite a bit of stuff there.
Oh my God. Okay. Hi, I'm Hannah. Join me as I delve into true crime, paranormal encounters, and all things spooky. Grab your flashlight and get ready to wander into the darkness with me. This is Wicked Wanderings.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Rob.
Hello. All right, so what are we talking about today?
So Hannah and I were browsing a bookstore, as we do when we're out. We had a coffee date probably about a month or so.
I would think so
now. And we were browsing the books, like how I like to do it. I sit on the floor in Barnes & Noble with my shoes off and really make myself comfortable.
Which I've never done that before, and let me tell you.
Taking your shoes off in a store?
Like sitting on the floor and just, because I always don't look at the bottom shelf. I'll be honest. I kind of bend over to where I can. And then I just stop and she's like, get on the floor. I'm like,
there's some good stuff on there.
Okay. And we just sat on the floor for like an hour, I feel like. And then we went to a different shelf and went on the floor.
When was this?
I don't know.
About a month ago.
Oh, okay.
We went out for coffee and then we went to the Barnes & Noble over in Connecticut.
It was fun.
And we were in the true crime section, naturally. And we had a really hard time finding the paranormal section. That was the we've had somebody watching for the last hour as they sit on the floor in our true crime section. But anyways, I came across a book that the cover didn't really look that enticing, and for me, I'm a big covers girl. Like, if it looks good, I'll probably be more apt to read the back and then read the book. And it was a story about a serial killer on Cape Cod, and being from Massachusetts, I was like, you would expect if it was from Massachusetts, I would have heard about it, and nothing rang a bell. And I read his name and it didn't ring a bell, and so I was like, all right, let's give this a try. So I finally got around to reading it on the TBR shelf that goes on forever. And I just have to preface it by saying, what a mess. This guy, he was called the Cape Cod Vampire as one of his nicknames, if you will. Which, after reading the whole story, I still was kind of like, I don't know if that matches for who he is. Like, out of all the nicknames that I could have given him, that one seems so insignificant. I'll let you guys decide at the end. But today we're going to be talking about Anton Charles Costa, and he went by Tony. Okay, so I'll refer to him as Tony.
Hi, Tony.
Was born August 2nd, 1944, and he is deceased. He passed away May 12th, 1974. So you can see just by that, he was not around for a very long time, though he did wreak havoc on Cape Cod for what feels like it should have been longer than a year, but he was pretty much active for just about a year. Like, I think it was 68 and 69 in the Cape. So he is considered an American serial killer, always in the Cape Cod area. And I wanted to start by listing off the victims first as a way of recognizing them and then referring to them by their first name throughout the rest. So his victims were Patricia Walsh, Mary Ann Wysocki, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, and then some others that were either confirmed involved or very highly suspected involved. Bonnie Williams, Diane Federoff, Barbara Spalding, Sydney Munson, Susan Perry, and Christine Gallant.
Damn, that was all in 1 year?
Yes.
God.
He had a really interesting story. He was presented as a carpenter. Initially, when I read the book, he was presented as a carpenter who was very much a hippie. He was really into heavy drug usage, which is all important for him. Though he had a lot of friends, he really struck me as a loner when I was reading about it. Like, it was very... People didn't get to know the real him, is kind of, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Did he have a drug of choice?
He kind of seemed like he would do everything. He did have a marijuana garden, quote unquote, that he would often use to entice people to a certain place. More to come on that later. It is also important to note that after his killings, but kind of looking forward to then look backwards again, in 1969, he was examined and they identified him as a schizoid personality. Okay. And they also identified him as a sexually dangerous man. To preface just some descriptors of kind of who he was
to come. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did have children very young. He married a woman who was incredibly young. I want to say she was like 14 or 15 when they started having kids and got married. It was a very interesting experience. He was married at 18, but she was much younger, and they ended up having 3 children together. So by the mid-1960s, their marriage had pretty much fell apart, and he had no contact with his kids.
Is that so?
It felt thrown into the book.
Is that probably a good thing?
Probably. I mean, I can't imagine that he would have been a stellar role model at that point. But that was kind of like, oh yeah, he has this wife and these kids, and it was kind of like, it felt more like an afterthought because that's how little role they played. He definitely struck me the way he was presented in Helltown, the book that I read, as very self-absorbed, very self-driven, a little perseverative at times. So I won't get ahead of myself into exactly how I know some of those excerpts, but more to come on that. As far as everybody could tell, November of 1961 is when he was actually like convicted of his first crime. So he broke into his neighbor's house and he was watching a teenage girl sleep. And so she woke up to this man, teenage boy, close to man, staring at her while she was sleeping.
Interesting.
Oh, talk about cringe.
And then he doesn't do anything. He just leaves.
How did he get in the house?
He broke in.
Through the front door, back door, window? It doesn't say.
No specifics on that one. He just broke in. And then the weirdest part is gets away with it, but returns a couple days later. And this time, he's caught trying to drag her from her bed down the stairs. The neighbors discovered what was happening, and they apprehended and held him down until the police arrived.
Did he know this girl?
There was no, real lead on who it was. It was just, to me, it spoke to him being a sexually dangerous man, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're breaking in, you're watching a young, teen girl sleep, and then you're trying to drag her out of the house. So obviously he didn't succeed. They apprehended him as he was doing that. And he had been convicted of burglary and assault. So he had 1 year suspended sentence and probation for 3 years. Which
that's it.
Seems kind of lax
like
for kidnapping a girl from
slap on the wrist. Jeez.
Yeah. It's believed that 1966 is when his first killing occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Bonnie and Diane, he gave them a ride to Pennsylvania when he was on a return trip from California, and neither of them were ever seen again. Just mysteriously.
Oh.
This is a trend that you'll start to see where it's like these people go missing around him, and I don't understand how nobody was like, how come everyone that Tony associates with is just vanishing?
How did we not connect 1 and 1 to 2?
Right. Like, and very quickly, I mean, and also I'm telling you and highlighting them to you in a very concise manner, but it's like, how did he not get recognized as this? So in 1968, his second incident is believed that he was dating Barbara when he was in California. She disappeared the day that Tony was returning to Mass.
How
Never
convenient.
to be seen or heard again. She just disappeared the same day he was going to make a return trip to Mass.
Sketch.
Mm-hmm. The third incident was in Provincetown. Sydney, who was 18 years old at the time, she was the youngest, vanished. Last seen entering Tony's car.
How old is he when he's making all these crimes?
His first one that we had mentioned when he broke into someone's home was when he was 17.
Okay.
And then he was only 29 when he died. So, I mean, he was not very old. He was in his 20s. The fourth incident, he had a new lover named Susan who vanished, and his response to people who asked him was she had gone to Mexico. But nobody had heard from her. She didn't tell anybody she was going to Mexico. You see what I mean? Even by this point, you're like, okay.
Because you would think her loved ones would be like, because like if that happened to me, like Hannah has no desire to be anywhere hot. Like Mexico would not be the thing to say.
Right. Or I would be like, okay, but she hasn't like told me, hey, I'll have a drink with you when I return.
Yeah.
Like, things that you just are like,
I know this person well enough that this isn't what's going on.
2 and 2 is not 4. I mean, and it's not uncommon for young women to maybe be leaving their family or maybe be leaving their friends, but like for nobody to know anything.
Yeah.
And everybody just seemed to be around him so tolerant. Like, oh yeah, they're missing. They'll be back. Very weird. Especially because he was an odd character. It's not like he was like, a businessman.
Yeah.
And he was highly thought of. So in late 1968 is when he officially had the divorce. And he was actually jailed for failing to pay child support. So this is when he met Christine, another one of his believed to be victims. They were hippies together. They shared drugs. It was definitely not a positive relationship. Which brings us to November of 1968 with Christine. She was found dead in her tub, and it was believed to be a barbiturate overdose.
A what?
Barbiturate overdose.
What is that?
It's a type of drug.
Oh.
Conveniently, he had been there, right? So I mean, finally his luck has to run out, right? Surely he can't just get away with this forever. So June 24th, 1969, is when Patricia and Marianne come in. And they're kind of where his story comes to a wrap. So they arrived in Provincetown for a weekend vacation. They drove up they're both 23. They drove up in one of their, it was a really pretty light blue Volkswagen Beetle. They went to a shared home, which it was kind of like a landlord who rented rooms, but you could be somebody who lived in Provincetown, or you could be somebody visiting, kind of like Airbnb now. And so they had gone and they got a room in this kind of shared housing, which is where they met Tony. The landlady had introduced them to Tony, who also was renting a room at the time. So the next morning...
I'm sorry, I'm just like stuck on the landlady being like, hey, meet so-and-so.
So from what I understand, Tony had moved into this house and he was kind of like, hey, I'm going to pay you for the whole month. I'm good at doing like, maintenance. He was a carpenter, so he could do odds and ends. She was an older woman. So it was nice to have a man around who could fix things when you have tenants and people coming in and out. So he had rented one bedroom. And so he happened to be in probably the area where they were coming to check in.
Oh, okay.
And was like, oh, and this is Tony. He's here, if you need anything, blah, blah. So the next morning, the landlady goes to check on the girls, and she sees that there's a note pinned to their door. And it's signed from Tony. It was something along the lines of, when you're up, are you able to give me a ride? He wanted to go someplace. So she didn't really think anything of it. But the following day, after that day she noticed the note, there was another note left on the door, the same type of paper, the same handwriting, saying that they were appreciative for everything that she had done and that they were checking out. Which she thought was odd because she was like, they were quiet guests, they were nice, they were chatty, but like, they just left.
But the fact that she noticed it was the same paper and same handwriting.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking a lot of that is like when she was being questioned by the police, she noticed like that was the case because she didn't really, like she would say, I didn't really think anything of it at the time. I was like, oh, paper is paper. And that was what was there. So she did go into the room, just curious to kind of see if everything was gone. And all of the girls' stuff was taken from the room. So it was empty as if when you check out of a hotel. Neither woman returned home, and one of the women was a teacher. So when she didn't return to school, the school had called her family saying, hey, it's not like her to not be here. Yeah. They were like, oh, well, she did go on a trip, but, she wouldn't have done an extended stay. So the families had reported them both missing. February 2nd of 1969. So you're looking at the difference between January 24th and February 2nd. Not too long, but also a little bit longer than you would expect for people to go missing and not have said anything. The Volkswagen Beetle was discovered, and it was sitting kind of in an area by the Turo Pine Grove Cemetery. So it wasn't in the cemetery, but it was kind of sitting next to it. Later the day, Costa actually took that car and moved it to Boston. Interesting. Very interesting.
Huh. From P-Town to Boston.
Right. Moved it. Just drove it. And I had to do a lot of independent research because in the book Helltown, there was a lot of things that were filled in, and I wanted to make sure that a lot of what I had was factual and not filled in for the point of telling a story. But in Helltown in the book, they are talking a lot about how he thought. So when he was in prison, he actually wrote a book called Resurrection, and it gave a lot of the details of these murders. But he blamed it all on his friend Carl, who the reader is led to believe it's an alter ego, especially with the schizoid personality. So he would often in the book be, committing these crimes or committing these things. And he would be like arguing back and forth with Carl, like, no, you can't do that. They don't deserve this. And they'd be going back and forth on it. So a lot of what they had described was like him moving this car around, and clearly something in him must have known he was going to get caught because he was like covering his bases at a whole different level at this point. You have to think all these other people went missing and nobody even looked at him. Nobody went looking for a body. Nobody stumbled upon anything. At this point, you're all like, what was he doing with the bodies? Like, Courtney, they're going missing, but you're not even confirming that they're dead. And some of them we can't. We can just only presume.
So bodies weren't found for everybody.
Correct.
Oh my God, that's insane.
So February 8th, the officers found a bag of dismembered body parts belonging to female. They were sectioned into 8 sections, and they did not belong to either one of the 2 missing girls, which was Patricia and Mary, that they were looking for. So they were like, what the hell is this? Yeah. We were looking for 2 girls that were missing. We found a bag of parts, and they do not match what we were looking for.
So then you're like, who the fuck is this? Or is these?
It was Susan Perry, who had been missing for 5 months in Mexico.
Mexico, quote unquote.
So they had asked him about these murders at this point. They had started to figure out like Tony is related. They're kind of like, okay, we're filling in the gaps here. We're seeing like maybe he's, involved in all these other things. And so when they're asking him these questions, he's like, as a behavior analyst, I'm like, oh my gosh, he is the least consistent person being interviewed I've possibly ever read about. So he's like, no, I wasn't there. That wasn't mine. And then they're like, well, we're asking you about this. Well, that wasn't mine. I mean, I knew about it, but it wasn't mine. And then he's like admitting things and he kept trying to tell them it was Carl. And they're like, you failed the polygraph test. Carl did not fail a polygraph test because there was an actual man named Carl.
But like back then, did they believe there was a Carl?
Yes. He was giving a real person's name who was, I believe, somebody from high school that he didn't get along with. And then he named his alter Carl.
Okay. But like now we know that he was talking about his other self.
I think he might have actually believed he was talking about Carl.
Wow. Poor Carl.
Right. Both Carls. Both Carls. On March 3rd, on March 3rd, Tony sent a telegram to himself at his mother's house from the girls that said, what happened? We waited as planned. Is everything all right? We'll meet you as scheduled. New York City. Love, Pat and Marianne. So he was trying to make it look like the girls just went on another trip and didn't tell anybody. He's trying to make it look like they're still alive and that, look, they love me. He was trying to like put on a show, and they were like, you obviously sent this to yourself. You have access to the phone number that sent this telegram. So he's getting really sloppy.
Wow.
He's getting really, really sloppy.
He's grasping at straws.
Correct. So on March 5th, they were continuing to check the woods at the cemetery where they were like, okay, we found these bags of bodies.
Yeah.
They've got to be here. The car was here. That other body was here. What's happening? And this is exactly where he had his marijuana gardens that he farmed. And that was often how he lured people to the cemetery. It was like, hey.
So my next question was, where he was dumping the bodies, was it kind of a safe place? Because you know how they say, like, when people dump, it's usually a place they know.
Yeah.
Or it's familiar. So this is where he was growing his pot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it was in a section of the cemetery. And he seemed to understand the cemetery very well. From the excerpts that they pulled from his own writing, it seemed like he knew it very well. So they did discover more human remains, a torso and a severed head that belonged to Marianne. And then in a grave nearby was the body of Patricia. Patricia is probably one of the more gruesome ones. And this wasn't mentioned in a lot of the research I found, but again, it was in Helltown. He was really into this taxidermy book, like very into a taxidermy book. And he enjoyed necrophilia with the bodies, and he enjoyed peeling the skin off of them, and with great precision. So Patricia's skin was peeled off of her chest, and under her body was another body.
Oh.
Sydney Munson, the 18-year-old who was missing for a year.
And to confirm about necrophilia, isn't that when they have sex with dead bodies?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is presumed, because I'm not sure if there's ways for them to tell based off of where they find sperm cells, if it was, before death or after. I mean, they could I don't think there's a way to age it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But from the book Helltown, it seemed like his preference was afterwards. And he did sexually assault both Patricia and Marianne.
From a psychology standpoint, I'm just thinking, like, is it fear of rejection? Is it because
there's a lot that you could say psychologically.
Yeah.
The coroner had determined that both Pat and Mary died as a result of gunshot wounds to the head and the neck. And the .22 caliber pistol was found buried nearby, and it was ID'd as belonging to Costa.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
A sincere expression of gratitude to our esteemed patrons for their generous monthly contributions. Lynn, Sarah, Courtney, Stephanie, Kate, Karen, Ashling, Mark, Jake, Brooke, and Margie. You too can become a valued patron and unlock a realm of exclusive content by supporting our mission for as little as $3 a month. Your contributions sustain our commitment to delivering high-quality content. Visit wickedwanderingspodcast.com and click on the support tab to join the ranks of our dedicated patrons. Thank you for considering this opportunity to deepen your engagement with Wicked Wanderings. Your support is paramount in enabling us to continue our journey into the realms of mystery and true crime. And now, back to the shit show. So did he do a lot of his damage after he killed them? Like the skin peeling?
Correct, yeah. He seemed to either do like a drug overdose situation, or really the only two that they got really, really gruesomely in detail about were Patricia and Marianne.
At least that's a small mercy to them that they didn't have to be tortured, literally.
Right.
I mean, oof.
This is where the nickname the vampire came in. The bodies were said to have bites in them, hence his nickname, and that's the only thing that makes him the vampire of Cape Cod, which I find to be very anticlimactic.
Where are these bites?
Just on the body.
Okay, so yeah, he would have to like drink their blood in order to be
right. Exactly what I was thinking too. I was like, I'll mention it because his thing is like the vampire of Cape Cod.
Yeah,
but it really wasn't.
Have you heard about the killer that? I mean, it's a little off topic, but just curious if you know about the killer that would peel the skin off his victims and make them into like lampshades and stuff like that.
I have read about that one.
Yeah, that would be an interesting episode, but we definitely would have a disclaimer
before
that.
Yeah, very, very big disclaimer. Maybe I'll go back and record a disclaimer for this one. I don't think it was that gruesome.
No.
There was no cannibalism.
No.
So May 29th of 1970, he was sentenced to life in prison. So he was, found convicted of 3 murders, 4 murders. It depends on where you're looking at your sources. Couldn't get a super clear answer. Everywhere I looked, it was like 50-50. But definitely Marianne and Patricia were the 2 that kind of sealed the deal for him. And while he was in prison, he did write his novel Resurrection, which described the details of the murder, and placed all of the blame on his friend Carl. Which for me, especially being involved in mental health, it's like you can clearly see where mental health was a big piece of it.
How did someone not catch that in the schools? Like, I know it was different back then, but like, how did someone not catch that?
He was his own worst nightmare. His defense tried to use insanity to plead him out, but he gave such a beautiful, eloquent, intelligent speech to the jury in his own defense. They were like, how can we say this guy isn't competent? You know what I mean? How can we say this guy didn't know what he was doing when he very clearly and intelligently just addressed us? And so then it's like, or is that the perfect crime, right? If you pretend that you are insane, is it the perfect crime? So I got really into like thinking about, was it an alter ego? Is it a personality split? Just while I was reading it, I was taking those notes. And I kind of think that it was. And along with that, the trauma from his mom, like the brief parts of it where they're talking about his mom, you can tell he like despises her. And so his respect for women and that violence towards women, I think really comes from a place of trauma with his mom.
Did he have a type?
Young. He seemed to enjoy young. But I do think like at some point he was an opportunist. So it was kind of like he would get the urge to...
Because, like with Bundy, it would have to be like brown hair. Like there was a certain type of woman.
I think he would just see an opportunity. And like, how would he have known before those 2 girls arrived to stay at that housing place? You know what I mean? They just kind of arrived on his doorstep. And it's like, well, I was kind of thinking about killing. And here they are. It's not like he could have separated them. They were on a trip together.
Right.
He had to... I was more impressed that twice... 2 of his crimes involved 2 women. So he took his first and his last were both 2 women. And this is all just stuff that could link him to.
Yeah.
So it's like, how many other times did this happen? Because then he was in California for a while, right? How do we know that things didn't happen when he was there too?
Right. There could be open cases there that he could have been involved with.
Absolutely. And the whole time through the trial, he's like, there's a maniac on the loose. There's a maniac on the loose. He's out. And it's like almost like, did he really not know he was the one? May 12th of 1974, when he was 29 years old, he was found dead in his cell by a corrections officer. He had hung himself with a leather belt. And he is now buried in an unmarked grave next to his mother in Provincetown.
Wow.
Shit. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that they marked it as an unmarked grave, but it's next to his mom. So I guess in a way it's kind of marked, because if you can find her marked grave, then he's right there too.
Just a sad human. Very sad human.
Yeah. People believed that because he was a hippie, he had like a cult of followers, and there were groups of people who loved him so deeply that they were like, no, he's innocent. And like perhaps they've carried on his work. But no proof of that. Jeez. I just can't believe that I didn't know about it.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
I thought for sure a serial killer who was so local, I would have known about.
That was interesting.
And they compared him to Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
Huh. I don't know if I'd say that, but...
I'm glad that your response is to also be left a little bit speechless, because I just felt like his whole story was like...
It's very odd.
Very much a mess, right?
Yeah,
it was very much like... You were thinking, oh, it's linear, it's going this way. And then all of a sudden you're like, what?
Yeah.
The book was good, though. Helltown was a good book by Casey Sherman. I would recommend it. There's another book about Tony as well that I just found earlier today when we were having pizza. So I purchased that too. So maybe after I binge read that, I'll update The Wanderers, and any new information I have, we'll keep up with Tony.
Excellent. So do you want to pick a card?
Sure. Unsolved homicide. We have the Jack of Hearts. Mary Frances Frankie Harvey. On November 29th, 1980, a 13-year-old girl was discovered shot to death multiple times at a gravel pit off Route 1 in Wrentham. She was last seen alive in Providence, Rhode Island on the night before Thanksgiving. If you have any information about this case, please call 1-855-MA-SOLVE.
Very sad.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was
very interesting case.
I wish it was a little bit more interesting, but like I said, you don't know what you're going to get when you first dive in.
You really don't. There was a lot of like me just staring at you like, huh?
Yeah, reading the book, there was a lot of me staring at the book like, what on earth is happening here?
And what was the book called?
Helltown, by Casey Sherman. It's available, I think, on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble.
Well, thank you, Courtney, for that amazing episode.
Thank you for
dealing
with my rambling.
Yeah, it was peculiar and weird, and I doubt our wanderers have heard of it.
Probably not. If anybody else has a case that they want covered, I'm open to suggestions. My TBR list for true crime is dwindling. So if anyone has something they have already read and they want to share about, or something that they have been wanting to read but haven't, send us a text. The link is in the show notes.
Absolutely. And please, if you haven't already, go to TikTok right now and like us, because once we hit 1,000, we can start going live while we're recording.
Come on, guys, it's a good time.
You can see how this shit show really goes.
You'll be either impressed or really bored.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, Wanderers.
Thanks for listening today. Wicked Wanderings is hosted by me, Hannah.
And it's produced by Rob Fitzpatrick.
Music by Sasha N.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to leave a rating and review, and be sure to follow on all socials. You can find the links down in the show notes. If you're looking for some really cozy t-shirts or hoodies, head over to the merch store. Thank you for being a part of the Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate every one of you. Stay curious, keep exploring,
and always remember to keep on wandering.